here on Kiwi.
Man brought to his knees and killed in the prime of his life.
2 million Cambodians died during the regime of starvation, overwork, and execution.
I see this beautiful girl in love with my brother, and he is just looking real chuffed with himself.
Well, we called it the hippie trail in those days.
Well, screening at the New Zealand International Film Festival is a brand new documentary called Brother Number One. It follows Rob Hamill to Cambodia seeking justice for his brother murdered by the Khmer Rouge regime in 1978. Annie Goldson is the director of this documentary. She joins me in the Kiwi studio this morning. Morning, Annie.
Kia ora.
Yet again, another great documentary that goes behind the headlines, because we saw this unfold somewhat on our screens last year. But you only ever sort of scratch the surface of what's really going on over there. But we didn't know while that was happening that you were in the background there documenting all this. How did you get involved?
Well, I had met Rob through a colleague, and to me it just seemed almost like I suppose the term is a no-brainer. To me, he's a very charismatic individual who has prominence as a Kiwi.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in Cambodia and Indo-Chinese politics, the whole post-Vietnam thing. And the legacy of Cambodia has haunted me, in fact. So I knew also that Sylvia Cartwright was involved, so I felt it would be of interest to a New Zealand audience. So yes, I became involved pretty quickly.
Rob didn't know that he was actually going to be even doing any of this until not long before he went, right?
That's right. I mean, it's a process. This is the first International War Crimes Tribunal that has used what's called civil parties, and I think it's partly because so many people died in Cambodia. 2 million died.
Yeah.
There are very few witnesses. So what you have is family members of those killed who can talk about the impact of those terrible deaths on their families. So, I mean, it's a good idea, and I think other war crimes tribunals will probably take it up.
So kind of like the victim impact statements we see in courts here.
Yeah, that's right. It is the same, and this was groundbreaking in terms it was the first time it had happened.
But also extraordinary that someone from outside Cambodia could come and speak at this trial.
I know, there was really only a handful of Westerners, we think perhaps 10 or 12, that were killed during the Khmer Rouge years. I mean, it was a closed country, even more closed than Burma or North Korea is today. So it was very difficult for people to get into Cambodia should they have wanted to. And Kerry, Rob's brother, of course, blew off course when he was sailing up through Asia. So it was, wrong place at the wrong time sort of thing. So, yes, but I think the choice of Rob and Rob's decision to do it was a wise one. I think it was of interest to Cambodia. One of the wonderful human rights lawyers we work with, Kareem Khan, he says something like the shrill cry that escapes the lips of a Cambodia or New Zealander is the same. But having someone from a different context allows you to kind of look again. The
grief is universal.
Yeah.
Extraordinarily brave Rob Hamill was to do this, because it's one thing to say, I'll go there and sit in front of a bunch of people and read a statement, but it's one thing to actually in fact do it, but also to retrace his brother's footsteps and dredge up the past as well. Was it hard to watch at all while you were documenting?
Oh, at times Rob really put him in situations that were very painful to him.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Rob, like many Cambodians, the past lives with them all the time, and emotion is very close to the surface. So there's always a bit of an ethical decision as a filmmaker. Western filmmaking tends to like it when people break down on camera. But I think you have to think about that in the ethical situation. But I don't feel I bullied Rob. I mean, Rob's not a guy to be bullied anyway, but I don't think I put him in situations that he wouldn't have chosen to be in anyway. Whether he really wanted to find out actually what happened to Kerry was something that kind of developed. He kind of knew generally the terrible things that happened. But he did, I think, get more interested in trying to find people who had actually met him, to know how his brother conducted himself, which seemed like, from what we can tell, was with considerable courage.
Yeah. It must have also been frustrating for Rob that there is no clear evidence of exactly what happened to Kerry, and there's no photograph either.
No.
Watching the film, one thing that still wasn't clear to me was why the Khmer Rouge was so methodical about record keeping, and about why there are all these documents and why there was all these photos. We do look at who documented and who took the photos, but I don't know why, though.
It was really, and I probably should have explained that. I mean, I know it was an issue, and I tried to address it a bit, but it was really about the chain of command in a way. I mean, I think Pol Pot and the brothers pretty much authorised everything, and they needed evidence. I mean, the regime had become so paranoid that going into this prison, Tor Sling, it was sort of a catch-22. There was the belief that if you actually were captured and taken there, you were ipso facto guilty.
Yeah.
But what had to be extracted from you was proof of that guilt through torture and through writing confessions that you were either CIA, FBI or KGB. Once that was extracted, you were killed. But in fact, that documentation, those so-called confessions, were taken up, our understanding is, to Pol Pot and several others who would be pleased that their hunch that they were trying to be undermined was right.
Yeah. One of the lighter moments in the film is an unexpected moment, really, in reading Kerry's statement, with the humour that Kerry injected into that statement because of how absurd and ridiculous the situation was, and that he was admitting to being a spy. It was mind-blowing, really, that was documented there. Can you make any sense of it when you're there? Do you get a feeling of closure at all?
You mean, does Rob get a feeling of closure?
Yeah, or even you as an observer.
Well, fascistic and totalitarian regimes have always been quite good at documentation. I'm not quite sure if it goes with the sort of systemization or not. But, in other prisons, though, in Cambodia, they killed many more thousands. I mean, 15,000 were killed at Tor Sling, but other prisons, they didn't bother. I mean, Tor Sling was seen as a special prison for important subversives, so they paid extra attention to documentation, as I say. But other prisons, they just holus bolus killed people. So, I mean, I just wonder if that documentation goes hand in hand. I mean, in a way, it seems incomprehensible, but when you look at the context of the time, kind of the post-Vietnam era, it's so interesting. I mean, the world stopped looking at Vietnam. I mean, America stopped looking because it was humiliated. The anti-war movement stopped looking because they thought it was all over. But in fact, there was awareness of what would happen in Cambodia, but there was no appetite for another US intervention.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll be too young to remember, but the anti-war movement would have gone berserk had America entered Cambodia. Yet you could say that America also helped produce the Khmer Rouge. I don't think solely, but helped produce it through the bombing campaign against Cambodia.
But if ever there was a case for them to go anywhere, that was it, wasn't it?
I know, but you know the geopolitics of the time would have made it impossible.
Yeah. The trial itself, that concluded. Rob wasn't at all sort of happy with the result, was he?
No, and I don't think Cambodians were either. I mean, effectively, Duch got 35 years, which was reduced to 19, partly because of time served, but also because he supposedly cooperated with the court. He did admit some guilt, although he never really took responsibility. And it actually reminds me a bit of the kind of Rupert Murdoch thing, actually. Oh, yes, we're terribly sorry, but we didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
I was only following orders.
A cog in the machine.
Yeah, yes, that's right. So I know both prosecution and defence have appealed, and we're waiting to hear the outcome of the appeal.
And now another trial, of course, is underway right now.
That's right, yes. The 4 remaining brothers who were the kind of inner circle, or sometimes called Pol Pot's clique.
Yeah. And seems to be turning into a little bit more of a circus than
Look,
the
it's
first
very
trial.
Fragile. The whole process is really fragile. People argue there's heaps of political interference. Having some prosecutions makes Hun Sen, the Prime Minister, look good, especially to donor nations. having too many could, he says, create civil war. I mean, the reality is these post-genocide situations is there are so many people who are culpable, from the very low-level torturers right through to leading officials who just melt back into the population.
Is there something to be said for, say, post-World War II, where they had the Nuremberg trials? It was bam, 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 it was all done, they're all hung and they're all gone. Is there something...
I would say so, but, you know, people weren't interested enough in Cambodia. It's not Europe. You know, it took 30 years for this to happen.
Yeah, a long, long time.
Yeah, and that makes any kind of evidential-based or judicial process very difficult.
And there still seems to be a lot of denial as well from members of the Khmer Rouge, just that...
I mean, Dork is the only one who's admitted some guilt.
Yeah.
And 2 million people died.
And the Khmer Rouge like to debate even the numbers.
They do.
Right down to whether or not it was necessary or even the numbers themselves.
Yes, some of them still say it was Vietnam. I mean, what happens if you kill all the intellectuals and revise the history? And these guys, once the Khmer Rouge were kicked out by Vietnam, the Khmer Rouge retreated to the border near Thailand and reinvented themselves. They all became freedom fighters for Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
So the ultra-Maoists turned into uber-capitalists and globalizationists.
Yeah.
And continued to fight.
Well, the documentary is called Brother Number One, and it is screening at the New Zealand International Film Festival on Sunday in Auckland on the 24th of July at 1 p.m, and then also on Wednesday the 27th at 3:30.
Although I have to say, excitedly, that the Sunday screening is sold out.
Oh, brilliant.
So I think it just might be the Wednesday at 3:30.
Okay.
Now.
Excellent, and no doubt moving its way around the country as well. You can
it will be.
check out nzff.co.nz.
Going lots of places, which is great.
That is fantastic. It's an important documentary. It should be seen by everyone in New Zealand. Go and see it, nzff.co.nz. Annie Goldson has been my guest and the director of Brother Number One. Thanks very much.
Thank you.